If you want to know what I remember most about my childhood, it's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. From counting lines and scripts to demanding costume changes, Steve McQueen was wildly envious of James Garner. But in 1966, Garner stole the role McQueen wanted most, and their rivalry erupted into a twisted story of rage and revenge that ended their friendship for good. The most shocking thing is that McQueen never watched Garner's movie until he died. What he found out made him realize he was wrong the whole time. Steve McQueen was born on March 24, 1930, in Beech Grove, Indiana. He never had a real home because his stunt pilot father left when he was only 6 months old, and his mother Julia drank too much to raise him. When he was 3, she sent him to live with her grandparents in Missouri for a while. Life was good because his great-uncle Claude took him in and was like a father figure to him. Claude was strong and fair, and he taught Steve how to work hard, respect others, and stand up for himself. For his 4th birthday, Claude gave Steve a red tricycle, which sparked a love of speed racing that would never go away, but things didn't stay stable for long. When Steve was 8 years old, his mother came back and took him to Indianapolis with her new husband, who was a monster. Steve had a hard time in school, but that wasn't the worst thing. His stepfather beat him over and over again until he had enough. Steve had enough, and he ran away. He was sleeping on the streets, stealing to get by and getting involved with gangs. His mother kept pulling him back, but each time she had a new husband, and each one was just as bad. By the time he was 14, he was moving from house to house, getting into trouble, running away with a traveling circus for a while, and ending up in Los Angeles, where his new stepfather threw him down a flight of stairs. Steve looked him in the eye and said, "If you ever touch me again, I'll kill you." His stepfather knew he wasn't joking. He talked Julia into getting rid of Steve when he was 14. Steve was sent to the California Junior Boys Republic, a reform school for troubled kids. At first, he fought it, but for the first time in his life, there were rules and discipline, which he resisted. But over time, he started to change. The other boys respected him, and he even joined the council and helped run things. That place left an impression on him, and even after he became famous, he never forgot it. He often went back, gave money, and reminded the boys that no matter where they came from, they were welcome there. They still had a chance, but he wasn't done rebelling. When he was 16, he went to New York to try living with his mother again, but it didn't work out. He worked as a lumberjack in Canada, an oil rig worker in Texas, and even a towel boy in a brothel in the Dominican Republic. He was arrested for vagrancy in the South and spent 30 days on a chain gang. That was a wake-up call. He saw where his life was going and knew he had to get out. When he was 17, he made up his mind and joined the U.S. Marine Corps. He wasn't gone overnight. He was demoted 7 times and put in solitary confinement. But something changed when a tank went off the ice during Arctic training. Without thinking, Steve jumped in and pulled 5 Marines to safety. He became a hero, and his officers started seeing him differently. He was put on President Truman's honor guard, and the Marines gave him discipline, which he had never had before. He served for 3 years before getting an honorable discharge. He was lost again, but then he found acting. Using GI Bill money, he joined the neighborhood playhouse in New York in 1952. He had no experience, no education, and nothing that suggested he could make it. But he had something better: fire, survival instincts, and everything else that life had beaten into him. When he stepped into a role, people felt it. His first real break came in 1958 with The Blob, a low-budget sci-fi horror movie in which he played Steve Andrews, a high school student trying to stop a deadly alien blob from consuming his town. There was one small problem. McQueen was 28 years old and didn't really look like a teenager, but that didn't matter. His performance was so good that the movie took off and made $4 million. The Blob wasn't supposed to be a hit, but it did. McQueen didn't get any of the money. He turned down a profit-sharing deal for a flat $3,000 paycheck because he thought the movie would fail. But it did. For years, he felt bad about that choice, but in the end, the movie did much more than that. It was important because it got him noticed. Dick Powell, a Hollywood heavyweight and co-founder of 4-Star Television, saw something special in him and gave him a chance in Trackdown, a Western show where he played a bounty hunter named Josh Randall. The audience loved him so much that one episode was enough to convince producers he could carry his own show. That's how Wanted Dead or Alive came to be. It ran from 1958 to 1961 and made McQueen a household name. He worked hard for every episode 3. He later said, "I learned my trade and it gave me discipline." That discipline would take him far. The show made him money, but more importantly, it taught him how to command the screen. Just as the show was ending, Hollywood came calling and he got a part in The Magnificent Seven. This was a big deal. The movie was a Western remake of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, and the cast was huge. Garner was supposed to play the lead, but McQueen had no intention of playing the part. He was still under contract for Wanted Dead or Alive, so he faked a car accident, put on a neck brace, and said he needed time off. Suddenly, he was free to shoot the movie. Once he got to the set, he started doing tricks to make sure everyone was looking at him. For example, when Garner was talking, McQueen would be in the background adjusting his hat, loading his gun, or shaking shotgun shells, anything to get people's attention. Garner saw through it, and at one point he hired an assistant to keep track of how many times he did it. When The Magnificent Seven came out in theaters on October 12, 1960, it was a huge success, making over $2 million, which was a lot of money back then. Elmer Bernstein's score became famous, and the movie was later added to the U.S. National Film Registry. On the other hand, James Garner was born James Scott Bumgarner on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. His childhood was hard from the start. When he was only 4, his mother Mildred died from cancer. Due to complications from an unsuccessful abortion, James, his 2 older brothers Charles and Jack, were raised by their father Weldon, Bill Bumgarner. But Bill had problems of his own. He drank too much, and wasn't the type of man who could handle raising 3 boys on his own. Things got worse when Bill remarried. His new wife Wilma was abusive. She beat the boys with anything she could get her hands on, and humiliated James in ways that left scars deeper than the bruises. In his autobiography, The Garner Files, he wrote about how she forced him to. It hurt him so much that by the time he was 14, his father finally divorced Wilma, but the damage was already done. James learned to rely on himself because no one else would save him. He didn't last long in school. At 16, he quit and started working odd jobs to make money. He moved from relative to relative's home, never staying in one place for too long, but those years made him tough. He didn't have any patience for authority. He didn't like fake people, and didn't want to follow the rules. That attitude would define him for the rest of his life. He joined the Merchant Marines because he thought it would lead to something better. But it didn't take him long to realize he had made a mistake. He hated the job, and was constantly seasick. So he quit and went back to Oklahoma. Soon after, he joined the Oklahoma National Guard, and when the Korean War started in 1950, he was the first Oklahoman to be drafted into the U.S. military. James served in the Army for 14 months and was almost killed in Korea. He was wounded twice and earned 2 Purple Hearts. When he returned home, he was a different person. He had seen too much, and knew what was important and what wasn't. He wasn't going to waste time on things that didn't matter. Acting wasn't even on his list of goals. A friend who worked as a talent agent suggested he give it a try. James wasn't sure, but he thought he had nothing to lose. In 1954, he got a part in a non-speaking role as a judge in the Broadway production of the Caine Mutiny court-martial. It wasn't glamorous, but it changed James's life. The real lesson came from watching Henry Fonda, who played the lead role in the play. Fonda had a natural, effortless style that James admired, and he later said that watching Fonda was like going to acting school because it shaped his own approach to being understated, real, and never over the top. After his time on Broadway, James moved into TV commercials, which led to a contract with Warner Brothers hired him in 1956 for $175 a week, which wasn't much, but it was a start. His first roles were small, in movies like Toward the Unknown and The Girl He Left Behind, but they gave him valuable experience. Unlike many aspiring actors, James never saw Hollywood as a dreamland. To him, it was just a job to pay the bills. His straightforward attitude set him apart in a business full of people desperate for fame. And ironically, it was this attitude that made him famous. Everything changed in 1957 when Warner Brothers took a chance on him. James was cast as the lead in Maverick. At first glance, it seemed like just another Western. There were a lot of them back then. But James brought something new to the role. His character, Brett Maverick, wasn't your average gunslinger. He was a gambler and con artist who used his brains instead of violence. Audiences loved him because he was charming, funny, and always one step ahead of everyone else. Maverick became a huge hit, sometimes even doing better than The Ed Sullivan Show. When Brett Maverick fought everything with a gun, he used humor and trickery to win. This departure from the norm made the show fresh and exciting, and it made James Garner a star. Then came The Great Escape in 1963, a war movie that changed history. Steve McQueen and James Garner played 2 of the most important roles. McQueen played Captain Virgil Hiltz, also known as the Cool King, an American pilot who was always looking for a way out and wasn't afraid to challenge authority. His fearless attitude made him stand out. The actor Garner played Flight Lieutenant Bob Hendley, the Scare. Unlike Hiltz, Hendley wasn't reckless. He was smart, resourceful, and knew how to get anything the prisoners needed, like fake IDs, tools, and anything else they needed to escape. Hiltz took the risks, and Hendley made the plans. Together, they were the perfect team. The movie was based on a real escape from the German prison camp Stalag GL3, but Hollywood twisted the truth. In reality, British prisoners led the escape. The movie changed the focus to, some people didn't like that American characters like Hiltz and Hendley were in the movie, but it wasn't exactly true. Off-screen, McQueen and Garner didn't get along. McQueen always wanted the spotlight, and he pushed for changes to his role, demanding more heroic moments. In fact, the motorcycle chase was his idea. The real escape had nothing like it. But McQueen felt that his character wasn't heroic enough, so he wanted more action, excitement, and most of all, more attention on him. Even though McQueen was a great motorcyclist, stuntman Bud Ekins actually did the jump. However, McQueen never told the public that, because he wanted to maintain his image as the coolest action star ever. Garner, on the other hand, found McQueen's need for attention tiring. McQueen would often try to steal scenes by making small but noticeable movements to draw attention away from other actors. At one point, he even complained about Garner's performance. Even though Garner tried to be polite, he couldn't help but be annoyed by McQueen's constant need for approval. He once called McQueen a poser for relying too much on charisma instead of real talent. McQueen's insecurities weren't just about his role in the movie. He was obsessed with being the biggest star, even counting lines in the script to make sure he had as much dialogue as his co-stars. His behavior caused problems during filming and irritated his co-stars, but surprisingly, it was Garner who stepped in to persuade the director to keep McQueen on board. Even so, McQueen kept pushing the limits, and at one point, Sturgis seriously considered firing him from the movie. Their rivalry didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. It got even more personal when McQueen thought Garner was having an affair with his wife Adams. Even though it wasn't true, McQueen was known for being deeply insecure in his relationships. In a disturbing incident, he forced Neela to confess to cheating by holding a gun to her head. ER, on the other hand, was devoted to his wife Lois Clark and had no history of cheating. But McQueen's jealousy wouldn't let go of the thought. Despite everything, Garner never spoke about McQueen with malicious intent. He saw him as insecure instead of truly evil. Even though he was talented and famous, McQueen was always having to prove himself, even when there wasn't any real competition. Despite the fights, they helped make The Great Escape a classic when it came out in 1963. It was an instant hit and is still considered one of the best war movies ever made. But the rivalry between James Garner and Steve McQueen didn't end there. In 1966, Grand Prix came out, a movie that tried to capture the fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled world of a famous racing fanatic named Steve McQueen was interested in playing the lead role of Pete Aaron. But before things could move forward, a fight broke out behind the scenes during a meeting with producer Edward Lewis. McQueen lost his temper, and the two quickly became angry with each other. McQueen, unwilling to compromise, quit the project, saying that he was already thinking about making his own racing movie and didn't want to be tied down to someone else's vision. Out director John Frankenheimer had to act quickly, which is when James Garner came along. Unlike McQueen, Garner wasn't known for his love of racing, but he was a proven leading man and he got the part right away. When McQueen found out, the tension was high, so Garner called him to break the news. McQueen's reaction was a long, awkward silence. Then a forced congratulations, and then he stopped talking to Garner for a year. Garner, on the other hand, went right into training. Surprisingly, he picked it up quickly. While other actors got nervous going over 150 MASH, Garner stayed calm and even did his own driving stunts, like a dangerous fire scene at Brands Hatch. By the time the movie was over, real racers said he could have competed professionally. McQueen didn't like it. He wanted to be the one who brought Formula One to the big screen, but he had to watch Garner do it first. That's when he went all in on Le Monde, his own racing. In order to get a true sense of speed, danger, and authenticity, McQueen insisted on filming during a real 24-hour race. However, this dedication came at a cost. The budget went out of control, there was no proper script, and director John Sturgis quit halfway through the project because he couldn't handle McQueen's need for perfection. Things got even worse when Le Mans finally came out. Critics called it lifeless, and while people liked the racing footage, the story wasn't there. McQueen had wanted to show that he could do better than instead, his movie almost destroyed him. While Grand Prix became a classic, won 3 Oscars, and starred real Formula One legends like Graham Hill and Juan Manuel Fangio. More importantly, it earned respect from the racing world, and Garner, who had started out as an actor playing a racer, became an important part of motorsport history. Years later, McQueen's son finally got him to watch Grand Prix. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew it was a great movie. The rivalry had been going on for years, and sometimes it got personal in Hollywood. Some rumors even said McQueen once urinated on Garner's plants out of jealousy. It's possible that this was true, but one thing was for sure: he never got over it. Over time, Lamas earned its own kind of respect. It wasn't a great movie, but it was one of the most realistic racing movies ever made. That's why racing fans still love it, even though it didn't do well at the box office. Steve McQueen was Hollywood's highest-paid actor, the ultimate tough guy, and the face of hit movies like Bullitt and Papillon. But by the mid-1970s, things were going badly. After the towering inferno, he wasn't seen in movies or at premieres for years. Instead, he raced motorcycles and drove across the country in a motorhome. When he finally came back, the magic was gone. His later movies like An Enemy of the People and The Hunter barely made a dent. Hollywood had moved on, and the world's biggest star was fading. But his career wasn't the only thing that was going badly. McQueen drank a lot. He drank too much, used drugs, and had a bad temper. His marriages were full of cheating, fighting, and violence. His first wife, Natalie Adams, later told of the horrifying truth of their relationship. He was controlling and abusive, and at his worst, he held a gun to her head. His second wife, actress Ali MacGraw, went through the same nightmare. No matter how much success he had, McQueen could never get away from the demons that were after him. Then he got sick. In 1978, he developed a persistent cough. At first he thought it was from smoking, so he quit. By the end of 1979, doctors told him he had mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer for which there was no cure. He believed that asbestos exposure from his time in the Marines and on Hollywood film sets had caused it. It didn't matter where it came from, he was dying and desperately needed a miracle. McQueen turned to alternative medicine. He traveled to Mexico and spent a fortune, about $40,000 a month, which is about $150,000 today, on strange treatments like coffee enemas, raw animal organs, and injections of... It all sounded crazy, but when you're dying, you'll do anything. In November 1980, he made one last trip to Juarez, Mexico, for surgery to remove huge tumors from his body. The surgery went horribly, and hours later his heart stopped beating. He was only 50 years old. Steve McQueen's life was never clean, quiet, or simple. He fought Hollywood, his own demons, and in the end he fought for his life. But even in death, he was still a leader. In the meantime, James Garner was one of those actors who never went away, even as Hollywood changed. Even in his later years, he kept giving performances that made people love him all over again. One of his best roles was as a kind-hearted widower in Murphy's Romance, 1985, which starred Sally Field. It was the kind of role he did best, charming, warm, and full of quiet strength. The movie was a hit, making $30 million, and his performance was so good that he got his first and only Oscar nomination that year. The movie reminded people why they had always liked him, and then in 2004 he played another role that would stick with them, the older Noah Calhoun, a loving husband who cared for his wife as she lost her memory due to dementia. The Notebook became a hit, making $117 million, and Garner's performance was one of its most moving. He didn't have a lot of screen time, but every scene he was in was important. It even earned him a Screen Actors Guild nomination decades later. Garner wasn't just a great actor, he also stood up for what was right. He fought against big studios when they tried to cheat him, which was something that almost no one dared to do at the time. In the 1960s, Warner Brothers tried to get him out of Maverick by saying there was a writer's strike, but he knew they had other projects he could have worked on, so he took them to court and won. It was a big deal. Then, in the 1980s, he went up against Universal Studios over the According to the Rockford Files. He sued them for $16,500,000, and after 6 years of fighting, the case was settled. The amount was never made public, but rumors said it was in his favor. More importantly, his battle showed how studios manipulated money to avoid paying actors, which gave others the courage to fight back. But years of doing his own stunts hurt him, and by the late 1980s, he had serious knee and back problems. In 1988, he needed quintuple surgery. Even though he had bypass surgery, multiple knee replacements, and a severe stroke in 2008, he never lost his sense of humor or kindness behind the scenes. He also struggled with depression, which not many people knew about, but he never let it define him. He was always professional, always respected, and always someone people looked up to. In 2010, he finally stopped acting for good, and on July 19, 2014, he died at the age of 86. Hollywood lost more than just an actor that day. People lost a man who had spent his whole life sticking up for himself and others. He didn't just leave behind great performances, he also left behind a legacy of strength, fairness, and quiet heroism that will never go away.